In this first video, we're going to take a look at the difference between weather and climate. To do so, I want you to consider the following two questions. What do you think the weather is going to be next week? What will the high or low be? How much rain or snow are we going to get, and will it be sunny or cloudy? Or consider what you might predict the climate might be in the middle of June or July. What might the temperature ranges be? And all of that, and the way I phrase the question, should have you thinking about what the difference between weather and climate might be. So consider your predictions to the previous two questions. Is weather or climate generally going to be more accurate in terms of a prediction? Well, that's going to depend on how we define the two. When we're describing weather, we're typically talking about the particular conditions outside at a given time or given day. So this would include things like the temperature, precipitation, wind, humidity, the pressure, and what the cloud cover looks like. So for example, we could say that today it's cold, there's a low of -5 degrees Celsius, it's kind of cloudy, and there's a 25% chance of snow or rain. We might also include things such as like the wind is traveling from a certain direction at a certain speed, and whether or not it's humid or not, and what percentage that might make up. All of these different things would make up the weather. However, when we're discussing the term climate, we're talking about the average weather in a particular location. And that average is given up over a long period of time. Typically, we say that to get a good indication of the climate of a region, we'd have to study it for 30 years. A region's climate will also dictate the plants and animals that are present. So what is the wildlife? What vegetables or fruits can be grown in this particular climate? Why do these animals exist here and not somewhere else? So in short, the weather conditions describe a short period of time, and then your climate would describe a longer period of time, and that climate information is based on the average data that you might collect, regardless of what the particular points are. So it might be data on temperature, or it might be data on precipitation. This figure from our textbook discusses what we call climate zones. So our planet is kind of divided into these climate zones. If you take a look at where Ottawa would be situated, we would say that Ottawa is located in the continental zone. This zone is described as an area where the summers are cool. The climate is also present in some parts of Eastern Europe as well as Southwest Russia, because these climate zones don't quite match up with latitude or longitude. And they do vary even within a country and even within a particular area across the globe. So we could see that while generally, near the Tropic of Cancer, we have these arid areas, it's not always the case, right? We have down by the Tropic of Capricorn, we have Australia, which is an arid climate zone, but then we have some places in Latin America which may be more tropical or may be subtropical. So the climate zone is really dependent on the area, and it's hard to kind of dictate what else might be there. So it's hard to predict just based on where it is on the map. Although, of course, as you move north, we can see we're generally more continental, and as we move towards the equator, we can see that we're generally more tropical. And then, of course, we have these polar zones at the extreme north and south poles. So when we're discussing climate, there are a lot of factors to take into account. We just kind of talked about latitude a little bit. So of course it does play a factor, but it doesn't quite match up exactly with the climate zones. But our latitude is a distance away from the equator being the center of the Earth. And we can talk about things that are also a little bit harder to see on a globe, such as the ocean currents. But the presence of large bodies of water might dictate the climate near an area. Any wind and air currents, the elevation, so how high above sea level are you at, and then a term we call relief, which is what the land formations look like around that area. So let's take this back to our original question. right? It's easier to predict the weather for a week from now or the climate a couple of months from now. Well, we need to answer maybe a more important question, which is what's the difference, right? So we can't really predict the weather several weeks out, but we could predict it relatively easily tomorrow or the next day. The weather tomorrow is going to be very similar to the weather today. And the predicting climate, we can do a long distance out because it should be relatively repetitive year over year over year. So the climate in the middle of July this year should be pretty similar to the climate in the middle of July last year. And that's just because by definition, climate is an average over several years.